So by now we know that when we have a metal and a nonmetal, they're going to form an ionic compound. So we are going to learn how to determine the formula of those compounds when we are just given the two elements. Okay, so our first step says determine the ions and their charges. So let's see. Magnesium is a metal, so it's going to form a cation. And oxygen is an anion because it is a nonmetal. Okay, and now the charges on them. So magnesium is going to be +2 and oxygen is going to be -2. Okay. Write the cation first. Good, right? We have magnesium as our cation, that's first, and the anion is second. Good. Right? Take the charge of the cation and use that as the subscript for the anion. Okay. Take the charge on the cation and use that as the subscript, and take the charge of the anion and use that as the charge of the cation. Okay. Only move the numbers, don't use positive and negative in the subscripts. Okay, so I'm going to come over here, I'm going to rewrite it, right, magnesium, and I'm taking this 2 over here, and I'm putting it there, right, not using the positive or the negative down there. Okay, then I'm going to take my oxygen, and I'm going to take my 2 from my magnesium, and I'm going to bring it down there. Okay, 2. Okay. So we did this, we did this, we did this. Make sure you're using the smallest whole number ratios. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Right now in this formula, I have a 2:2 ratio. So if we look at this, right, is there any way we could simplify this? Is there any number that we can divide 2 and 2 by, right? Lowest common denominator. So yes, of course there is. We can divide them both by 2. So divide both by your lowest common denominator, right? That's 2. And that's going to give me a 1-to-1 ratio. 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, so now I'm going to rewrite this with my lowest whole number ratios. Okay, what's my next step? If the subscript is 1, you don't need to write it. Okay, if the subscript is 1, you do not need to write it. So we're going to scribble those out, right? We do not write 1. Okay, so that means my new formula is going to be MgO. Okay. The ionic compound formed by magnesium and oxygen is going to be MgO. Okay, and then my last one is make sure the overall charge is 0. So let's see how we do our mathematical check. Okay, so for MgO, my first thing I'm going to write is the number of cation atoms in the compound. So let's see, how many cation ions do I have? I just have 1. Okay, so for my second thing, I'm going to put the charge of the cation. That was +2. If we remember. Okay, next I'm going to add that to the number of my anions, which is also going to be 1, and my charge of the anion, which is going to be -2. Okay? This should give me 0, right? If I take this, I'm going to get +2. And if I take this, I'm going to get -2. +2 and -2 are going to give me 0, right? So we need to take the total positive charge of the ionic compound and the total negative charge of the ionic compound, and those should equal out to be 0.